Welcome back. I'm Mike Schmidt, former Multnomah County District Attorney, and currently, against my better judgment, deep in draft preparation for 5 different fantasy football leagues this year. It's kind of a problem. And of course, I am your hopefully favorite part-time podcaster. Today, I have a real honor and privilege. I am sitting down with a sitting justice of the Oregon Supreme Court. My guest went from public defender to private practice to the Multnomah County Bench, Court of Appeals, and now to the state's highest court, appointed by Governor Kate Brown in 2022 and elected to keep his seat in his own right in 2024. He's also a teacher of Oregon constitutional law at Lewis and Clark Law School, happens to be my alma mater. We are going to cover a lot of ground today. What privacy actually means anymore in a world of license plate readers and cameras and data brokers, whether Oregon's constitution can protect rights the federal government is backing away from, and whether that old judges just call balls and strikes line still holds up. And then finally, whether the way we elect, or really sometimes don't elect if appointed, our judges is quietly one of the least examined parts of our local democracy. This is Justice Bronson James. Let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast, Bronson James, Justice James of the Oregon Supreme Court.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I am so excited. First of all, I don't know, I'm a connoisseur of podcasts. I listen to quite a few of them. I don't know that I recall ever hearing a justice of any Supreme Court, state, federal. I mean, maybe it happens. I'm sure it does, but this seems kind of a rare opportunity for me.
We do occasionally come out of our monastic conclaves and talk. Probably not as often as we should, really, because judges are public servants, public officials. And so I think it's great to avail ourselves of opportunities to get out in front of the public and respond to questions.
I couldn't agree more. I so appreciate it. And we'll get into this. But I frequently hear from friends and they're just like, I don't know. I mean, I don't really know much about judges. Like, what is it like? What are they really doing? And so I'm excited to get into that. But before we dive down that rabbit hole, I want to out you a little bit.
Sure. This is a little bit of an ominous way to start your podcast.
No, I know.
But...
Yeah. Most of our listeners probably don't know this, but I'm told from reliable sources, that you are completely down to crush epic RPGs. And I hear that you have at least played the Mass Effect trilogy, other things. I heard you beat them all. Is that accurate?
That is not accurate. I am an acknowledged Renaissance geek. I enjoy all things in the sort of nerd spectrum. I'm probably most known. There was a Willamette Week article at one point about the sleeve of comic book art tattoos that I wear. I love video games, any form of game. Probably one of my proudest accomplishments is about 3 years ago now, I had a group of clerks appear in my doorway at the court, and they said, we were thinking that you might be interested in running a Supreme Court D&D campaign.
I just need to set this up a little bit. As a lawyer myself and going up through the ranks and everything, and it's like, especially you're out of law school, you're doing all this stuff, and everyone's just like, Judge, Your Honor, Justice. I can't imagine the nerve that these individuals had to work up to have we were just hoping that maybe you would, I don't know, you seem like,
I agree. It was commendable exercise in courage.
Yeah.
But my response was, you have absolutely pegged me correctly. At which point we started, and is still ongoing, to the best of my knowledge, the only Oregon Supreme Court D&D campaign.
That's incredible.
So, and I take a lot of pride in that. You know, back in the day, back in the 40s, there's a couple of great books on this, but there was this underground poker game in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And Roosevelt would play. Several of the justices from the U.S. Supreme Court would play, senators, congressmen. And there's amazing stories about what would occur there. And I dream of a world where there is this sort of underground D&D game. And I think Oregon can make this happen.
Well, I'm visualizing this. This is incredible. I'm visualizing this. We need to commission a very legitimate artist, and we're going to do a playing like dogs playing poker.
Yes.
Except for, and which has been remade 1,000 times with Elvis and Barack Obama and all. We're going to do that. We need to do that. Needs to be actually Governor Kotek, if you're listening, or if I get a chance to talk to you in the future, I'm going to push this. That needs to be the gubernatorial portrait, I think.
Oh,
let's just go for it.
I mean, that sounds great. Yeah.
If not, it should be in the dungeon room.
Oh yeah. I mean, maybe it's not hung in the main hall.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. The close up will be, but
go.
the zoom out will actually be that. Well, that is incredible. Well, thank you for that insight. I love that. I know a lot of folks who listen to the show are going to really appreciate that detail, but it really goes to show that you are not a automaton or a robot, or as some judges or justices have said in the past, I'm just there to, read and call balls and strikes. You're a human being who brings human being things. What else should people know about Bronson James? Tell us a little bit about your origin story.
Oh, I graduated Reed in 94, right? So, kind of the sort of .com, boom that's happening right there.
Yeah.
And basically anybody could go into the technology sector at that point. And I was kind of recruited, offered a job in that sort of emerging technology sector. And I did that for a number of years.
Okay.
And worked around the world, doing a lot of work on data privacy, internet security at the time. But if any of your listeners attended Reed or are familiar with Reed, Reed does an exceptional job of instilling in its students that if you do not go on to earn some sort of a PhD, you have essentially failed the institution. So I came away with a strong pressure that I had to go do that. So
I love that. It's not parents imposed.
Oh,
it's,
no.
It's
institutionally imposed. Yes. And so I had this growing sense of guilt that I had not been fulfilling my obligation to the institution. And so I left, and I thought briefly about going to get a doctorate in history. But employment seemed like a good end game at the end of it. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my doctorate in history. So I went to law school, not for any particular reason.
Mm-hmm.
I had no lawyers in the family. Didn't really know much of anything about law school.
Just seemed like the next professional thing to do.
It seemed like a way to maybe assuage my guilt at letting down my alma mater, while at the same time possibly translating this into employment at the end.
Which is hilarious, right? Because had you stayed in the technology field, the emerging.com, I mean, you could be, Mark Zuckerberg at this point.
Oh yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. It was a disastrous financial decision on my part, because I came out of law school. I briefly went back into the technology sector doing privacy work, but law school, as you know, law school sort of changes you a little bit.
It does. Unfortunately,
and
good and bad.
I had done work at the public defender's office, and then it
Mhm.
kind of hooked me. So I basically left law school and went to work as a public defender at a vastly different financial level than what I had been working in corporate America.
Yeah, no doubt.
So law school was a terrible financial decision for me, but absolutely the right decision as far as happiness and satisfaction. All of my early jobs, like before graduating college, were all food service.
Yep.
I kind of love what food service jobs gave me.
Yeah.
You learn a lot.
I could not agree more. And I think a lot of people who have been through food service share this. I mean, having to deal with customers.
Yep.
I have a good friend of mine. He was a server. He went through everything like that. The guy leaves, and tipping culture, everything is a big thing. I mean, he puts a 30 to 40% tip on everything because he's like, no, I know what they were going through. Yeah. I know what it's like. I was there. It sucked. I see other customers. It's like, and I remember, I had when I was working at Arby's, the front counter, I'd have very well-meaning, very nice people come up to me. I'm in high school. I'm a senior in high school, right? I'm going to go to college. I'm doing all the things. And very well-meaning people come up to me and they'd be like, you seem like a bright young man. Why are you wasting your life here at Arby's? You ought to go to college. Have you considered that? And I'm like, no, I hadn't. Would you like curly fries or horsey sauce or what else can I do? Yes, I did. I thought of that. I thought of college. Yeah. Just dealing with people.
I heard the same things, but I think it's something that needs to be said too. Something that always bugs me about comments like that is the notion that a person choosing to work in a service industry is somehow wasting their life.
Yeah.
Right. You were providing a valuable service to the community. Right. Yeah. And I don't think that should be in any way looked down upon or degraded, but celebrated just like any other things. There's a lot of things that you can do and make a lot more money that doesn't serve your community as much as working in a restaurant.
Hey, Reed College, if you're listening, stop pressuring your students to go out and get master's degrees. They are delivering to their community. All right. So at some point you go to law school, you get into the public defender's office, and some point along the way, you're like, you know what? I've been talking to judges for a long time. Maybe I want to be a judge. Was there a moment or a thing or what kind of made you want to become a judge?
Sure. By this point, I had owned my own practice for a number of years. And I personally found owning a small business extremely stressful, like many small business owners do. And so that was an aspect of it. It was also that I had done, what I will call advocate work, right? Mm-hmm. As a lawyer, you represent a client.
Yep.
You make arguments that benefit that client, even if you know in your mind, this might benefit my client, but I'm not sure the law or society is benefited by me making this argument.
Yeah.
But it serves my client's interest. That's the job of the lawyer. That's what the lawyer is supposed to do.
Yep. Ethically.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to. But I had gotten to the point where I was like, I would like the freedom to be able to consider bigger issues, not just from one person's perspective, but like what would be better systemically. And that seemed like the transition. So I applied to be a Multnomah County judge when an opening came up. And I was extremely fortunate to be selected for that. And then became a Multnomah County Circuit Court judge for a couple of years.
Yeah. So you had this idea of what the job was going to be like. And then you got the job, right? You're the
Yeah.
dog that caught the car. And
Yep.
so what about the job of being a judge? Maybe in surprising to you, but you're a lawyer. But also maybe that people just listening to this, they're not lawyers or in the legal profession, would maybe find surprising. Because I think we all have this TV image in our brains of being a judge. So what did you find surprising? What do you think folks would find surprising?
Well, so I have had the great fortune of being a judge now at every level of Oregon's courts. So I started the trial court, then I went to the Court of Appeals, which is the sort of the mid-level court, and now at the Oregon Supreme Court. All three are very different jobs. The trial court is the closest to being what you expect for no other reason than I'd done trial work. I'd conducted trials. I'd seen a lot of judges, right?
Yep.
And the work of the trial court judge is, I guess, what you don't necessarily prepare for is how incredibly busy the trial court is.
Yeah.
How much of your day is running from one thing to the other, to the other, to the other, and how very limited time our circuit court judges have to think or prepare for what's in front of them. It's very common to go into a hearing as a trial judge and not even like, why am I here?
Yeah.
What is this case about? What do you lawyers need me to do? And so it's very much quick reaction, thinking on your feet. Trial court judges to me are amazing in their ability to give parties answers and decisions so quickly, and how so often that very quick answer turns out to be right.
Yeah.
So they do an amazing job. Appellate work was probably the most unlike what I expected.
Yeah.
And there's a number of reasons for that. I'm not, I think I'd be getting very wonky inside baseball if we went into it much further.
Yeah. But just for people listening, you know, who may not be familiar, in general, you have the circuit courts, which that's the front door to the judicial system.
100%.
And so, you know, that's where you're first, if it's a state matter, you're filing your suits, if you're going to sue somebody or you're in a lawsuit, or if the criminal system, of course, that's where you start. Now you get to the Court of Appeals. The job is really to look at the work that was done at the front door.
Right.
And like you say, you got judges who are moving from matter to matter to matter. They're making quick decisions based on their experience and everything else that but they're moving quick. Now you're at the review level at the appeals court, but we have one more level of review in Oregon, and I think is pretty normal for most states.
Yes. And that would be the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And both of those courts are not doing the work of trial courts, right? They're looking at what a trial court did, and they're looking at those decisions made along the way. This piece of evidence was in, this piece was out. You know, we see this all the time. And objection, Your Honor, and the sustained, you know, or overruled.
Right.
Those moments are what appellate courts look at. And there's only usually a few of them that are brought to the appellate court's attention, and they're asked, was that right or wrong legally under the law? And if it was wrong, do we need to do this case over, or can we say, yeah, you were wrong, but we don't think it really harmed the overall
Didn't really
case.
change anything. Yeah.
And so that's what the appellate courts are doing. It's a more detached process. Trial courts, you have witnesses, people are taking the stand, they're testifying. You don't have that in appellate courts.
Right.
It's a more academic process. It is certainly a more contemplative process, right? The circuit court judges very correctly will remind appellate judges, you know, I made that decision in 30 seconds. You've had 6 months to think about it.
Yes, exactly. Well, and it must be, and I think this can be true at the circuit court level as well. But the appellate court, I mean, you, like you say, you're reviewing decisions that were made based on the evidence that you must sometimes just be like wanting to pull your hair out. Like, why don't I have this evidence? Like, why didn't we hear from this person? What is that? Like, that must be incredibly frustrating sometimes.
So it is at all levels.
Yeah, sure.
Right. You can be overseeing a trial and, every judge was once an attorney. And every attorney likes to think that the way that they would have tried the case is the best way to try the case, right?
That's why I never left attorneys on my juries.
Yeah. And so you can sit as a trial judge and watch a trial unfold and be like, wow, that's not what I would have done, right? Same thing with appellate judges. You can be like, this is the record that I have, but wow, there's some stuff missing, right? I've used this analogy before when talking to people. I think it's very apt. I like to say that judges are like vampires, right? They sit at the threshold, but you must invite them in,
yes,
right?
I see.
And it's the lawyers that invite them in, right? They can't invite themselves.
Yeah.
That would be wrong. And so
I have a whole new framing for how I think of things now that is more frightening, but I like it.
And that can be a frustration, right? As a judge, is to see something that you think might not be how it should be, but no lawyer has invited you in to get involved.
Yep.
And we don't want a system where judges are out there just doing it on their own.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think every lawyer who's ever tried a case has at least one time in their career been sitting in a courtroom and thinking to themselves, I think I've got two opponents here. I've got my opposing counsel and I've got this opponent in a robe.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And that just doesn't lend itself to faith in a neutral system. And so it's important that judges don't inject themselves that way. But as a judge, it can be sometimes frustrating when you sit there at the threshold and you're like, let me in, invite me in, and no invitation comes.
Vampire James, let me in. You like being a justice on the Supreme Court? You enjoy that?
I do. I also loved being at the trial court.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I still go back. I try to try a couple of cases every year. In fact, I'm at the time that we're recording this next week, I'm scheduled to hear a case.
Nice.
Just to have that human interaction and things. I think it's good for the soul. But it's a great privilege to be on the Oregon Supreme Court.
Well, I want to get back and I appreciate. Where I want to go next is around privacy. So I want to start getting into some of the meat of the issues that are out there in our world. But I love that you have a background in technology because it, obviously kind of sets you up and has in your career set you up to consider matters of privacy.
Yeah. I mean, to be clear, I have a background in 90s technology, right? And so I have a sort of archaeological background of technology.
It's almost like, I am an elder millennial. I was born in 1981, right? And so I'm in that sweet spot of very much aware of answering machines and pagers and VHS, and also, grew up with AOL and then the evolution thereof. So I feel like you're kind of in a similar spot professionally.
Yeah, definitely.
You've been on both sides of these things. So I want to get, because this is such a huge issue. I mean, I could pull out my phone right now and look and just look at my news feed, and I would see a number of articles that are relating to privacy. And the big thing that I'm thinking of that is pushing a lot of this right now, I mean, obviously, artificial intelligence is moving. Speaking of moving technology from where you were first involved to now, but then we have this almost completely comprehensive surveillance state that is evolving, not from the state necessarily, but from corporations, from private corporations. We have companies like Flock that are spreading across the country, license plate readers and more. They're not just reading license plates anymore. And also Yeah, and Palantir, right? And I can't sign the user agreement and to use my iPhone that I purchased for so much money, right? I can't use it unless I agree to give away my privacy rights, and at least to some extent. So I think a lot of people right now, and this isn't a left-right issue. This is everybody. I see it in rural communities. I see it in urban communities are struggling. In our constitution, in the federal constitution, and then we'll talk about state constitution, there has been found a right to privacy. What does that even mean anymore? Do we have a right to privacy? And I don't mean that in a very legal sense, but just what are you seeing as people are struggling with privacy?
So definitely this is a very topical issue, right? And it's going to be. And I think one of the challenges that we particularly see in this area is the law is a very slow moving ship.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. But the rate of our technological advancement, I want to say that that's Moore's law, if I'm remembering.
Right. It's like doubling and doubling,
exactly.
and doubling and doubling.
The rate of our technological advancement is far outstripping the ability of the law to react in a timely way. Right. And, we are currently, like in the federal, particularly if we're talking Fourth Amendment, we're dealing with issues now. And the law is, our American English common law system is built on precedent. Mm-hmm. But if we stop to think about, we're talking about issues of digital privacy using cases that we're talking about pen register traps on payphones, right?
Yeah.
And so we're straining the our ability to analogize to the cases that came before, right?
Right. Even more so than, for example, and we don't have to go down this road, but like the Second Amendment and how that's being interpreted at the federal level. And like, we got to go back to muskets and who was allowed to own what, like, what is the corollary to the way things were? I mean, it's not apples and orange. I mean, it's apples and elephants.
Yeah. Now, I mean, fortunately, and I know that I think we'll get to this, Oregon has different ways.
Yeah.
Under our state constitution to approach some of these problems.
Yep.
And, I think it's appropriate for me to say, I was born in Oregon. I've lived most of my life here when I haven't been living abroad. I love this state. I am very parochial in my approach to the law here. Like I believe very much in Oregon solutions for Oregon citizens, right? And we have in our state constitution a number of tools, ways that we have interpreted the state constitution that hopefully have positioned us as a state to be a little more nimble as this technology changes.
Yeah.
Not to say that the federal courts and the federal constitution won't be able to do that, but they are locked into certain ways of conceptualizing the problem that will be challenging. I mean, the Fourth Amendment is defined by what's called the reasonable expectation of privacy. And your question hits at exactly that, which is the more we live in a world where we all know everybody's got our data. Yeah. Everybody's selling our data.
Right.
Everybody has monetized us and our lives. Do we really have an expectation of privacy?
Yeah.
Right. And that is a challenge under the Fourth Amendment that's tied to this notion of expectation of privacy. Oregon is not.
So you touched on something we should just get into and tease out. And this is obvious to lawyers, and it probably is obvious to anyone who's ever stopped to think about it. But I don't think is necessarily obvious to lay people. There's a federal U.S. Constitution. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of media and everything else, when people are talking about, oh, the Constitution says, that's where people's minds go, is the federal Constitution. But every state also has a constitution.
Yes.
And they were adopted at different times.
Yes.
And actually, we're on the 250th anniversary of our federal constitution.
Yes.
Our state constitution, not so old. What year?
1859.
Thank you. I knew you knew. 1859. My recollection, largely adopted from Indiana's constitution.
So modeled off a lot of Indiana's, some others, and then there's some own Oregon secret sauce in there as well. But yeah,
I'm not well, versed specifically in our history, but my understanding from reading through it a little bit was, it's great. You come out on your covered wagon. They're like, hey, we need a constitution because we got a state here. Who's got a copy of one? And they're like, I got Indiana's, and someone throws it in, and they're like, yeah, I like most of this, but let's take a little bit of this from. Kind of how it happened.
That is kind of how it happened, right? We don't know a lot of kind of the founding of that, because in what I often talk about in my class with students is like a very Oregon moment. One of the very first votes taken at the Oregon Constitutional Convention was whether they wanted to pay for somebody to record it. And they said no.
We don't have recording money. We're just getting started.
And perhaps we can see a through trend.
Oh, God. Can you imagine? Hey, everyone, we're going to write a constitution. Should we write this down? No, come on, man. We're just going to get it done.
So we know a lot, but we don't know everything that we would love to know.
Yeah.
And yes, it is modeled on others. I think, the first thing that people need to understand is that there is this, I think, a false historical notion that state constitutions are modeled off the federal constitution.
Yeah.
It's actually reversed, right? So when the founders of the U.S. Constitution were drafting it, they had models from the other colonies, because those colonies had constitutions at the time, right? And so state constitutions are really the primogenitor and the sort of primary source for this, not the other way around. And then also when you deal with states like Oregon, right? So we're, 1859, U.S. Constitution is well established at this point. But importantly, all of those things that we think about in the Bill of Rights, right? Under federal law at the time, none of those applied to the states. Right. Those only constrained federal government. And so when the state is making its own constitution and is creating its own set of rights, it's doing something fundamentally different, because until it created those set of rights, nothing constrained the state. Right. And so these are different documents in different times doing different things by different people with different experiences. And they create this sort of overlaying patchwork of laws and rights. And the federal, what I like to describe as the federal constitution is the floor. Nobody can go below the floor.
Right.
But states can go above it. They can build above it. They can create rights that are more protective of civil liberties, that are more restrictive on governmental encroachment to civil liberties than the federal floor. And, Oregon has done that in spades.
So we started this segment talking about privacy, and you've touched on what the federal expectation of privacy, the law is kind of built on. Is the Oregon Constitution's protections of privacy different?
So it is. So first of all, the Oregon Supreme Court has said that the concept of privacy is found in multiple different pieces of the Oregon Constitution, right? The word privacy itself doesn't appear in the Oregon Constitution.
Similar to the U.S. Constitution.
Similar to the U.S. Constitution, but the concept, right, is found in different areas. So, for example, the court has talked about, you have a right to an attorney, right? It wouldn't be much of a right if your conversations with your attorney could be eavesdropped on. So there's implicit in that is a notion that there's privacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of where we find it. In one of the key ones, so we have the Fourth Amendment in the United States Constitution, and the equivalent in Oregon would be Article 1, Section 9 of the Oregon Constitution, but it's written differently, right? So unlike the Fourth Amendment, which says, persons shall be, secure in their papers and effects, right, against unreasonable search and seizure.
Yep.
And that has largely been interpreted to be a restraint on the executive branch, police, for example, right?
Exactly.
The Oregon Constitution doesn't have those words. It begins differently. It says, no law shall, right? And so the Oregon Supreme Court has said, well, that Article 1, Section 9 is not just a limitation on the executive branch. It's also a limitation on the legislature and what laws the legislature can pass that might infringe on Oregonians' privacy. So little distinctions like that, some of them come from differences in the text themselves, and some of them come from differences of interpretation. So we talked about how the Fourth Amendment talks about the reasonable expectation of privacy. So the Fourth Amendment would say, they would look at you, right? What is your expectation? Is that socially reasonable, right? And we talked about the struggles of trying to assess reasonableness in a world where we're increasingly giving up our data.
Exactly.
The Oregon Constitution has not been interpreted by the Oregon Supreme Court. They have rejected the expectation of privacy test, right? And instead, the standard is the reasonable, the expectation society sets for the conduct of our government. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not on the expectation of the individual and the individual's reasonableness. It's on our collective expectation of how we want our government to behave.
Yeah.
That shift in focus means that there is an entirely different set of tools that are available in Oregon to bring to bear to these problems that aren't necessarily present. And we see this replicated throughout our constitutional system. And Oregon is not exclusive to this, right? So Oregon is what I like to call the epicenter of independent state constitutional work, largely because of the work of a man began as a University of Oregon professor, became an Oregon Supreme Court justice. His name was Hans Linde, right? And national regarded scholar, and really set us on this path to independent state constitutional grounds. Many states are not like this, right?
Interesting.
For over 30 states in our nation are what are called lockstep states, meaning they interpret their state constitutional provisions. So if they have a provision on like search and seizure, they're like, our provision means whatever the U.S. Supreme Court says the Fourth Amendment means.
30 states do that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. Oregon, that's one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum is Oregon, right? And now a few other states. They might not like to say they copied us, but I like to say that they did.
I love this for us.
Oregon is a leader in many things, right? And this is one of them. And so out here is Oregon basically saying, we're always going to consider our state constitution first and independently. And only if the state constitution doesn't give us an answer or provide the person a certain degree of rights that would be at least meet the federal floor, will we ever even consider the federal constitution? And so it's really interesting. It's interesting to practice law in Oregon. It's interesting to be a judge in Oregon. in my time as a judge in Oregon, I bet I have needed to construe a federal constitutional provision 5% of the time, because 95% of the time, the Oregon Constitution gets us an answer, and often that answer is superior to the federal Constitution.
Which is completely different from judicial experience in those 30 states.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they are mainly, probably, that's what they're looking. They're just looking at the federal Constitution.
They're looking very strong at the federal Constitution, right? And you know, we're out here. It is a very fitting state motto. We fly with our own wings.
I'm going to try to unpack a little bit of what you said, especially as it pertains to the privacy thing, because I think it's so fascinating and so important as people are thinking about their privacy in Oregon. You got the federal conception, which is reasonable person and what they could expect. And as we've talked about, where I'm giving Apple the right and Palantir and everybody, and I drive in the streets, and my reasonable expectation of privacy as an individual is severely diminished by my own actions and choices to participate in the data economy and everything that we have. The Oregon framing of that is, as you said, if I understood correctly, what is your expectation vis-a-vis how the government and what they can do to look at your privacy? Vastly different question.
Yeah. Because
I think most people anywhere in the United States would think, well, the government's not allowed to know where I'm driving every minute, and also where I'm, you know, who I'm talking to on the phone and who I'm sending text messages to, and, you know, other private communications that these corporations have access to these things. And we know our data can get sucked up and traded. I saw this, a post on social media, and a guy said, hey, go on McDonald's. They have a privacy section. I think California passed a law that said you have to do this, and you can download your profile at McDonald's. He says mine was 50 pages. They know where I drive. They know what time I go through. They have me down to the penny on how much they estimate I will spend every single month on McDonald's. And he's like, McDonald's, one company that he has over years frequented. And so if that's the federal idea of privacy, I'm sure glad that Oregon has a different conception of how to figure that out.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't want to, you know, overly disparage the federal courts, right? I think the federal courts are struggling with this and struggling with how to create a conceptual framework for privacy, right? So I don't think they've thrown out everything, right? They see these same problems.
Sure.
It's just that in Oregon, we have certain tools, right, in our toolbox that have given us ways of approaching problems, not just in privacy, but in all kinds of legal ways that are different than the federal courts. And historically, Oregonian civil liberties have benefited from that.
So I think a lot of people around the country, nationally, but here in Oregon are struggling with some of the things that we're seeing at the federal level from this federal executive administration, the Trump administration, what we're seeing in terms of our rights. I mean, we're seeing people who are citizens of this country being plucked off the streets by ICE, by immigration enforcement. We are seeing differences. I mean, just to take it to Portland, in the way that we can be policed and by who can police us in that ways, and who can use munitions and who can't use munitions. And so I think we're experiencing what I would perceive, my words, as an erosion of how I feel in terms of my rights vis-a-vis the federal government right now. We've talked Oregon. We do things differently. We can have different interpretations, different tools in our tool belt. Should we, as Oregonians, I think that's something that people don't understand. Should we be thinking of this as an opportunity to shore up some of our constitutional protections in this state? Or how should we be thinking about this if you're worried about where things are going on the federal level, but understand that we have different tools and a different path here in Oregon. Should we be considering that? It's a very broad question.
The answer is yes, right? And when I talk to lawyers all the time, I emphasize to them the importance of considering the Oregon Constitution in the arguments that they make. And we on the court consider the Oregon Constitution. All of this is designed to give us the opportunity to decide things locally, right?
Yeah.
For ways that work for Oregon. Now, sometimes there are going to be things that are going to be decided at the federal court that are going to control, right? There is the supremacy clause, right? But historically, in our system of federalism, states were given extraordinary autonomy, except for a narrow category of things that were given to the federal government. And I think that, and it's important that I sort of stay out of politics, and I'm not going to get into that.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that not just with this administration, but with prior administrations, there has been a growing interest in states around the country to decide things on a state basis to sort of preserve some control over this decision making. And that is what the whole system is designed to do, right? There's a famous quote in a U.S. Supreme Court case where it calls the states the laboratories of democracy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think increasingly states are seeing that they maybe haven't had their laboratory spinning up to full capacity, and now they're more interested in doing that. And I think that's generally a good thing. And it has historically been a good thing for Oregon. And yes, it's something that we need to always be mindful of how we can do things here in a way that allows Oregon to sort of be Oregon acceptably within the framework of the broader national conversation.
I love the laboratory of democracy. It's something that I've thought a lot about throughout my career, and kind of almost in a, in my job as the head of the Criminal Justice Commission, I oversaw a lot of aspects of criminal justice in different counties, and different counties, even counties, approach things in different ways.
They do. Yeah.
And I love that. I think it's a strength. I think it allows people to tailor interventions that are acceptable to their community. Mm-hmm. And they're trying something, and they might hit the formula that gets us the good results.
Yeah.
And, what I'm seeing at the federal level is an effort to consolidate and centralize control and power. And I'll give you a specific example. At the federal level, there was a law that was passed that would preempt states from regulating artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And even at the time, I thought to myself, I mean, like, I don't agree with it. I think I see what they're trying to do here, but I thought, man, what a missed opportunity for the states to individually wrestle with how do we protect our population? How do we consider this? How do we grapple with this? And instead to pull that away and preempt the states from having a voice in that. Is that kind of what you're talking about in terms of the laboratory of democracy?
It is. And, I share your concern that this distributed system that we have, where states are independent and under their state constitutions doing their own thing that works for them. And then we've got this federal overlay, which sometimes, will set a floor. And I share your concern that the sort of freedom of the laboratory might increasingly come under pressure.
Yeah.
And it's something that we just need to be mindful of, that we need to guard against. I think that this pressure is in some respects inevitable based upon the forces that we're seeing, not just nationally, but in the world.
Yeah.
Right. We are seeing, and I think this is sort of universally acknowledged. I don't think it's a controversial point. We're seeing growth in inequality at levels that we've almost never seen. And I think most political scientists will say that when you start having such inequality disparities, you need more sort of top-down control to make that possible. And you need increasing pressure. That's why we see political scientists talk about things like authoritarianism around the world. Right?
Yep.
One of the ways we might see that in the context of courts cases in a judicial branch is a trend towards sort of centralized top-down decision-making, right?
Yeah.
Because single points of decision-making are simply more efficient systems for inequality to work in, right?
Yeah.
And a robust federal system where the states are being laboratories of democracy, that's an inefficient system for that type of thing. And so I think there is a natural increasing pressure that we're going to see based upon just the times in which we are living, right? And that is really, it's going to require us to decide, and this is honestly probably a good thing because it's good for us to engage in civic conversation about how we want our world to be, right? Yeah. But it's going to have to, it may force us to decide this laboratories of democracy, this dual system of federalism, is this something we really value and are we willing to protect it?
Yeah. So I want to get to one of the things that I hear from folks a lot.
Yeah.
You started out as a circuit court judge.
Yep.
And we have, this is kind of a rare thing, and we'll touch on that too. We have 2 elections for circuit court judges, contested elections for circuit court judge in Multnomah County on the ballot this November. And I hear from people all the time. One, even during the primaries, I think any lawyer gets texts from their friends. Hey, who should I vote for? What do you know? Right. And they say, well, this and that and blah, blah, blah. And I give advice. And now we're going into a general election and there's 2 candidates for each of the positions. And the same questions are going to come up again. Who should I vote for? I don't know anything about these people. And that's one of the reasons I so appreciate you coming on the show, because I think a lot of people in the community feel like they don't really know much about judicial candidates and judges in general, maybe not feeling accessible to local people. And so I'm wondering, you've gone through a campaign, you've both been appointed and you've stood in campaigns and won. So maybe unpack that a little bit from the perspective of a judicial candidate.
Sure.
Like, what are they going through? And there are ethics rules and things that they have to navigate. And then I want to talk a little bit about, how people in the public who are lay people can be informed and maybe are things working the way that we would hope they would, but starting with your perspective.
Yeah. So I think it's important to recognize that there are different ways that judges can become, or people can become judges, right? And number one, let's keep in mind that we work in a system where there are 3 branches of our government. And the judiciary is a full independent branch of the government.
Yep.
But it's intended to be nonpartisan, or at least it is in Oregon. There are some states where you actually have a party designee, even as a judge. Oregon system, it is election-based, and a judge runs for election every 6 years. When the judge retires, in the middle of their term, it may go to the governor's office for appointment. The governor will appoint an individual who will then run at the next election.
Yep.
Election systems have great benefit in that they provide a tool of accountability, right? But it comes with trade-offs. And one of those trade-offs is, how do we elect judges? We don't want judges to be politicians. We don't want them out there campaigning on what they're going to do when the case comes in front of them. We don't want that.
Right.
But we also would sure like to know something about them.
Yeah.
And that has always been a bit of a struggle, is to how to communicate that information. Part of that code of judicial conduct is what judges can and can't say when campaigning. It also applies to people who aren't judges, but are running to be a judge.
Yeah.
Right. And understandably, that sort of constrains the information flow. And so it has been a perennial problem and not just with us, with all states that elect judges. How do we get a read on somebody who wants to be a judge? What are they thinking? What's in their head? What information can we know that would help us as a reasonable voter? We can talk about what that might be, but it is at the outset, let's acknowledge what it is. It's a somewhat unsolvable problem.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I find fascinating and confounding and frustrating is I have a good sense of who a judge is or who a candidate for judge is because I'm in the legal community.
Yeah.
And either I know them or I'm pretty quickly able to suss out based on who their relationships are with, what kind of work they've done, maybe seeing evidence of some of the outcomes of the work they've done. Also by who is supporting them.
Sure.
It's kind of easy, I think, or a lot easier for lawyers to figure out, oh, this is that type of judge. I think I'm philosophically aligned with them. This is that type of judge, not my cup of tea, right? Not my judicial philosophy or what I'm looking for. Voters, on the other hand, who are not lawyers and maybe don't know any lawyers, seem to be completely outside of that knowledge. And so it creates this almost, inequality or dynamic of lack of information for one party. And so you see groups of lawyers like prosecutors back a judge, defense attorneys back this judge, trial lawyers will back this judge because they know they presume they know what they're getting.
Yes.
And yet the public is kept in the dark. And so it's an asymmetry is the word I was looking for.
I think that's very true.
And so it almost seems to me like, you're nonpartisan and you have no biases and you're going to get in there and you're going to follow the law, right? Which is what you hear judges say. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to apply the facts to the law and I will come up with what the law says. But different interest groups have a different read on this that the public doesn't. And maybe it is an unsolvable, challenging problem. Like you say, appointments is one way to go, but then you have in Oregon, you have a Democrat governor appointing judges. So you would think that her team does vetting and understands the judicial philosophy of the candidates she's going to appoint. Right. So yeah, I guess I'm just struggling with the asymmetry in information to the public and what to do about that.
One of the challenges, and this is a persistent challenge in any democratic system, is it requires effort on the part of us in this democratic system to sort of educate ourselves. Yeah. Right. So some of this is, it's not that this information can't be adduced. So it might require some effort. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. That's always been the case.
True.
I think a lot of this begins though with certain questions that we need to ask ourselves before we ask a candidate, right? And I think this is true across all branches of government. So, before you vote for governor, it seems like an appropriate question to ask yourself is, what do I expect the person at the head of the executive branch of my state to do? What do I expect that branch to do? Your legislature, the same thing. The courts, right? What is it that you expect courts to do? What are their roles in your vision of your state's democracy? You began your question with the courts apply law to the fact. And so I guess my question back to you is that really your vision of what that entire branch of government is supposed to do?
I think what I'm struggling with is, and I think, politics is local, and I'm looking at national things.
Yeah.
I don't think even no matter where you are in the spectrum of politics and whether you're cheering this on or aghast, I don't think anyone's looking at the Supreme Court and saying, oh, look at them. They're just applying the law to the facts and the ball's going to land where it may. Like, nobody thinks that is what's happening here. I think there's an acknowledgement, and whether, again, you're cheering this on as my side's won and my team's won, and so now we get the rulings that we want that is going to perpetuate, or you're aghast and you're like, I can't believe this is, being trampled to get the results that they want, no matter what the law is. We all see that happening, right? And so locally, I think we're still like wrestling with this. Well, I can't really understand what the judge's biases may be, and every human being has biases, but I'm not going to get to deduce them or really get to know them, because the judge has to be neutral and approach cases neutrally. And I think maybe there's just an erosion of faith in the institution that a lot of us are experiencing, saying, I don't think this is about balls and strikes or facts to law. I think that there are insiders who know what a judge will do, and there are outsiders who have no idea.
I mean, I think that's a fair assessment. With respect to your comment about the sort of erosion of public trust, we definitely see plenty of surveys and focus groups that tell us that there's been an erosion of trust in the judiciary at the federal level. And my hope is that we build a wall against that erosion for the state level. And, part of what I think can build that wall of erosion is that the public does have a choice in judges in this state, right? So the question is, how do we get the information to them that would help, right?
Yes.
You mentioned, various organizations and institutions, and they provide a very valuable service. Sometimes they will send questionnaires to judicial candidates or have conversations with judicial candidates and report back to their membership or something like that. Where I would offer a piece of constructive feedback in that process is that oftentimes when I see those, they seem very sort of subject matter results oriented, right? How is this person on environmental issues? How is this person on criminal justice issues? That type of thing. And for me, and granted, this could be just because I'm like a nerdy appellate judge, right? So this may be over intellectualized. Feel free to tell me to get lost. I am most interested in certain bigger philosophical pictures, right? So one of the things I love to do, and I've had the opportunity in the past, before I was a judge, I sat on several selection committees advising governors on judicial appointments. And there are certain questions, things that I always want to know. namely, what is your view of this branch of government, right? What do you think its role is in a 3-branch system of democracy? Most people, like you point out, and there are differences. There's the work at the trial court is totally different than the work at the Supreme Court. So some of these questions don't apply equally. But I think, as you acknowledge, most people don't realistically think that the U.S. Supreme Court, or probably Supreme Court justices anywhere, are just calling balls and strikes.
Right.
And that's because the law is written with a lot of squishy words, right? A lot of squishy value words, right? What is reasonable, right? What is fair? What is cruel? These are naturally value-laden words, right? And the law, for hundreds of years, has been a series of interpretations with reasonable alternate pathways, right? And so I think it's a fair question to get into sort of more philosophical pictures. What do you view the role of this branch of government is in democracy, right? If we accept that, take a number of philosophers who would say that the purpose of government is to improve the lives of citizens, right? If the judicial branch is part of government, how does the judicial branch improve the lives of citizens? And if you were to be a judge, how would you view your role as a judge in improving the lives of Oregonians? Good question.
Great question.
Right? I also think that there are really interesting sort of bigger picture questions that are, you can never ask somebody how they're going to rule. They shouldn't answer that. The ethics rules prohibit that, and that's appropriate.
100%.
But there are some really interesting philosophical questions in the law, right? Martin Luther King Jr., in Letters from Birmingham Jail, writes about the moral obligation to follow just laws and the moral obligation to passively oppose unjust laws. I have asked people before, do you agree with that? And they almost invariably say yes. And then I ask,
no one wants to be like, no, MLK had it wrong.
And then I ask, if in the context of a judge, how does that apply?
Yeah.
Right. And honestly, I don't even care about the answer. 100%. What I want to see is a wrestling with the philosophical conundrum.
Yeah.
Right. Because at the end of the day, I think, like any, frankly, any public servant out there, the goal is to fill public service seats with people who are thoughtful, empathetic, who understand that the world isn't black and white, and that they might have a position, they might have an answer, but that sometimes the more important thing is not the answer that you give, but the fact that you wrestled with the answer in a complex way that honored the arguments on all sides. That's more than anything the qualities that I think make good public officials and, in the end of the day, good judges.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would encourage.
I so appreciate that. Because even, when I was elected as district attorney, as district attorney, I got to say, hey, these are my policies. This is what I will do when I get elected, which is different than what a judge can or should do. But I was still confronted with specific situations that are nuanced, that are hard, and that from a 100,000-foot view may look like I made a decision that was inconsistent with the principles and things and my values that I ran on. But you don't always get to just things aren't black and white. You don't get to say, oh, no matter what, I would I'm against mass incarceration. I ran on that. I think that we should shrink the system. Did I send people to prison? Yes.
Yeah.
So it's like you do have to. And so I appreciate what you're saying at any level. I think a lot of times our polarization of politics gets caught in this, litmus test, this like black and white, you're always going to do this, when really what I hear you saying and what resonates with me is it's the way that people approach these challenges with values that you as a voter would be aligned with, and that you can trust that that's the lens and the values they're going to bring. Now, sometimes the end result might not be the way that you had hoped it would be, but so long as the appropriate values were brought to landing at that result, we can all at least say, well, they approached the issue in a way that I appreciate, that I know that they wrestled with this.
To me, that's important, and it's, as you say, it's something that we're increasingly seeing lost in sort of political discourse. I've also seen this as a lawyer with my clients, right? I had a client one time. I was representing an individual who was going to be sentenced to prison for a lengthy period of time. We spent a lot of time at that hearing. There was no question in my mind what the judge was going to do, and that's what they did. But they spent well over an hour talking to my client about their life and everything like that. And my client cried at that hearing, not because they were going to prison, but they told this judge that nobody had ever really listened to them in that way before, right? That's somebody who's engaging, right, with the issues in a way that restores faith in a system, right, rather than take it away. And so when we're looking for me, public service candidates of all types, but judicial candidates in particular, I am looking for somebody who displays that level of nuance, who sees the validity of various arguments, who truly wrestles with it and doesn't give away pat answers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That to me is a better series of questions that I can ask somebody, rather than, what do you think about this particular specific issue?
First, as an aside, as a candidate, one of the things I appreciated most was house parties.
Yeah.
It is such a throwback, I felt like, in our democracy, of still a time when neighbors get together in a community with the purpose of listening to a candidate talk and have an opportunity to actually answer questions. So maybe someone who's listening to this is going to attend a house party. So you're at a house party and you get your opportunity to talk to this judicial candidate. If Bronson James is sitting in the crowd eating chips and cheese and crackers with his neighbors, what's a good question somebody out there might consider proposing?
Oh, let's see. Let's think of a couple of them.
Yeah.
How about, what's the best example you can think of judicial courage that you've seen?
I like this.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see what they say. Right? And then, we've already touched on one, right?
Yep.
What do you think the role of this third branch of government should be in improving the lives of the citizens of our state? Great question. Right?
That I love that question, because I don't even think judicial candidates are thinking to themselves in that frame. I'm running for judge because I am going to approve the lives of Oregonians this way. I've never heard a judge frame an argument that way.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously we're not talking about results in individual cases, right?
Right.
But
exactly.
This is a whole branch of government, and the purpose of government is to improve the lives of citizens. So how do you do that as a judge? Fair question. And I think the other thing that I would ask is to what degree and how should a judge be involved in their community?
Yeah.
Right. Because what we don't want is we never want to be in a system where any of our elected officials are set apart from the people who elected them. Right.
Yep.
That's how you end up getting ruled over, not a self-ruling democracy. Right. And so I think it's a fair question. How should a judge be involved in the community? And if you are a judge, how do you intend to be involved in the community?
That is actually something that I look for when I'm sussing through judicial candidates. I want to know, where do you volunteer?
Yeah.
Like, where do you show up?
Yeah.
And I don't care necessarily where the answer is. I want to see that you are in proximity to community. Could be your church, could be your Rotary, could be, volunteering at the soup kitchen. But I want to see the interaction of a judge and people who are experiencing life on the ground.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. There's no right or wrong here, nor is there any like acceptable or unacceptable amount. People are different, right? We need introverts in office just like we need extroverts, right?
D&D players,
that's
just
right.
like we need poker players.
And so it's going to be different for each one.
Yeah.
And sometimes you ask a question, not necessarily because you want to hear the answer, but you want to observe the reaction to the question.
Yeah.
And I think that might be one of those examples.
I want to ask you, I think it's such a great question. Can you give us an example of a time you've seen judicial courage?
Sure. I'm going to give you the easy, low-hanging fruit example that I would think any candidate should come up with.
Candidates listening to this,
right?
Here you go.
Brown versus Board of Education. Right?
Yeah.
And why that's judicial courage is it's not just deciding a case, it's ordering another branch of government to do something against that branch's will, right?
Yeah.
That's judicial courage. And there are other examples of it, but we see in Brown versus Board of Education a view of what the court, going back to that question, what is the role of this branch in improving the lives of its citizens in a tripartite democratic system? Brown versus Board of Education had an answer to that question.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And just like nowhere in the Constitution says the remedy for this type of discrimination is to force the executive branch to bus children and make sure for their safety, right? The judges courageously said, no, we're going to, we find this and you're going to have to effectuate the constitutional rights of these individuals. This action must be taken by you.
Yeah. And I think questions like that force somebody to, first of all, sort of define what is judicial courage, and then that sort of touch on so many other larger issues, not case related, right?
Yep.
So completely appropriate question, I would think, for a judicial candidate, but a really revealing one.
Well, and I will say there have been many examples of judicial courage on display during this iteration of the Trump administration, where I have seen judges make decisions and rulings that have put them and their families in harm's way. And they do it anyway. And some of them very bravely calling it out in saying so. And so I am very grateful. Our democracy is fragile, and there are so many instances across the branches of government of elected officials standing up for the institutions that have saved us, I think, from losing this fragile democracy. And we're not out of the woods. But I so appreciate those people and acts of courage that I see happening around our government. Bronson, I want to ask you just one wrap up question.
Sure.
Folks listening to this have been, hopefully this has really helped them think about things, develop their ideas, and just, again, I'm grateful for you coming on here and having this conversation, because it, I think, is a rare conversation for people to hear from a sitting justice. If they want to learn more, they want to educate themselves, like what do you recommend to people that they can do to do the work that you've said that it takes to have a democracy, that people have to do some work themselves to figure out what they want and also what they want to see in their officials?
Sure. The problem is that we live in a headline soundbite world.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how things are fed to us. And I think what people really need to remember, particularly when we're talking about the law, court cases, things like this, we see headlines about this court did that. And they're headlines, right? They're just a couple of characters. And the law is complicated. Cases are complicated. There's a lot of moving pieces in them. And, I've talked about how, judges, there is no black and white. Judges live in this bit of gray, right? But then the results of cases tend to be reported as black or white.
That's right. Oh, and I won, you lost.
Exactly. And I think, first of all, people should be skeptical, right? When you're fed like a headline that is sort of about the law, but is black and white, it's probably not. And it's a lot of work to then go and be like, all right, what actually occurred? There are resources out there. There are some great blogs. There's some great commentators that provide sort of more in-depth resource. Mm-hmm. But I guess what I would really encourage people to do is recognize that decisions that are reported by any court, or circuit court, anybody like that, there is a complex story behind it. There's many moving pieces. There's lots of issues at play. And to resist the easy temptation to stop at the headline and judge based just on the headline. It unfortunately takes some work. It takes some investigation. And I'm very realistic of people's time in a very modern world. But if nothing else, even if you don't have the time to go beyond the headline, at least understand that the headline you've been given probably isn't the full story, is a healthy mindset in approaching these types of problems.
Justice Bronson James, Oregon Supreme Court, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
That was Justice Bronson James of the Oregon Supreme Court. If you take one thing away from this conversation, let it be this: the people sitting on our courts, deciding privacy cases, deciding what our state constitution actually protects, deciding cases that could genuinely change how you live here. They are running for office, and most of us pay not much attention to it. That's not on the judges, that's on us. So the next time a judicial race shows up on your ballot or a friend texts you asking who to vote for, you now know a few better questions to ask than who has the most yard signs. If you want more conversations like this, subscribe to Schmidt Show PDX wherever you're watching or listening, and follow along on our Substack for the write-ups. My name's Mike Schmidt. Thank you so much for spending your time with us, and we will see you on the next episode.